You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another movie review. Today I'll be talking about the newest Godzilla film, Godzilla King of the Monsters. Now, Godzilla King of the Monsters was also the name used for the American release of the original Godzilla, which was released 2 years after the original Japanese version was. So that's what the name was a callback to the original Godzilla's Americanized version. And that's not where the callbacks stop. This movie has plenty of good callbacks. First off, the movie itself features the three most iconic Godzilla movies other than Godzilla himself as well. They got Ghidorah, they got Rodan, and they got Mothra. As far as callbacks, I'm gonna go over those first. Obviously, there's the monsters themselves, but they had covers of each of their themes, too. The original Godzilla theme, the Mothra theme, and for the first half of the movie, they referred to Ghidorah as Monster Zero, which, if you're unfamiliar, the name Monster Zero actually comes from a movie called Invasion of the Astro Monster, which was actually released in the US originally under the title Godzilla vs. Monster Zero. On top of that, they also had the Oxygen Destroyer, which was an element used in the original Godzilla to defeat Godzilla, and they use it again in this movie. Now, this movie is one that I thought was really great. I actually liked this movie a lot. I'd say it's way better than the movie that preceded it, the 2014 one, and even with that one, I'd say that one was a decent movie that I think gets a lot more flack than it deserves. While I do think that this one was by far better, and that one could be maybe a little slow at times, this one here, Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019, never bored me and never felt like it dragged. Some of the human characters were a little stupid, like for instance, Vera Farmiga's character didn't really make any sense in her motivations. Like, I did not understand, like, her angle at all, because her major plot point, this is kind of a spoiler, so you have been warned, but her major plot point is her son was killed by Godzilla during the events of the previous film, and so because of that, she wants to give the giant monsters control of the Earth, as somehow to make up for her son getting killed. So she basically wants to make it so that other people's sons can be killed. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me how her logic works. That requires some sort of crazy mental gymnastics for that to work at all. The human characters really weren't all that interesting. There were a couple of them that I liked, like the Asian scientist guy that was also in the previous film. I liked him a lot. And there was a couple others that were decent. It has that one girl, Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things, in it. She was alright. She was probably one of the better actors, but she wasn't in it a whole ton. Like, she was just kind of a side focus rather than a main focus. The movie itself had some pretty cool monster battles in it, and while I do think that there are better monster battles in some of the other Godzilla movies, I think that some people who criticize this one for its monster battles are being a little bit overly harsh. I personally think that these battles are pretty representative of what a Godzilla film should have. Now, granted, the human stuff, again, not the greatest, but you know, you always got to have some sort of human exposition in Godzilla movies. And I think that the battles that they showcased were pretty damn good. I do think that they kind of obstructed Mothra a lot. You could hardly see her through most of the movie. But then there was the big reveal at the end where she was in the final fight scene. So I don't see anyone's complaint with that because she was still in it. You saw plenty of Rodan, plenty of Ghidorah, and plenty of Godzilla. And you saw plenty of Mothra by the end of it. I don't get why critics don't like this movie. It doesn't make any sense to me. I thought this was great. You know, when you go into a Godzilla movie, you expect giant monster battles and some human exposition that you could probably take or leave and the movie would still stand as the monster battles. But, you know, you gotta have some sort of human element to tie it into mainstream audiences. That's just how these movies work. Personally, as myself being a Godzilla fan, and although I haven't seen every Godzilla movie, I've seen probably 12 of them, maybe 13. I couldn't tell you exactly, but I've seen quite a few of them, but nowhere near all. But that being said, as a fan of Godzilla, I was not disappointed going into this. I thought it was great. I thought the little callbacks they had to Kong Skull Island, because, you know, they're obviously teasing up to the next one, were great. They've also, again, this one's a pretty major spoiler here, so I'm gonna warn you in advance, but after the end credit scene, after Ghidorah is defeated, the main villain guy ends up taking one of Ghidorah's severed heads, and he's like, It cuts with him with the head planning to do something with it. If you're familiar with Godzilla, then you probably know about Mecha Ghidorah, which is a robotic body that has one of Ghidorah's real heads on it, as well as some animatronic heads. So the fact that they were teasing Mecha Ghidorah tells me that they may do another movie in the future after Kong vs. Godzilla. So I'd highly recommend watching this movie if you are a fan of Godzilla, because it's a great movie. It's got plenty of monster battles. If I had to give it a ranking out of 10, if you twisted my arm for it, I'd say personally I feel like it feels like an 8. I'm not the best with doing number ratings. But for those of you interested, I'd say personally it feels like an 8 out of 10, but that's coming from me who I already like Godzilla in advance. So if you like Godzilla, you kind of know what you're getting into with this movie, and I think it's really unfair the way that critics talk about it. If you look at Rotten Tomatoes, there's a very big disparagement between what the critics are saying and what the audiences are saying, because audiences like it a lot, critics don't. And there are some audiences that don't like it too, obviously, and there's some critics that do. It's not, one way or the other completely, but for the most part, audiences like this a lot more than critics do. And that's a reason I personally have never really trusted critics, because I think that, the way that a critic thinks is not the way that the average viewer is going to think. And I think critics are just kind of pretentious assholes a lot of the time, so I'm not going to take their word for it. I'd say if you're looking for a big monster battle movie, although this one doesn't have as much battles as you may like, it still has plenty of them in it. Yes, it could have had more, but that can always be said. I think it had a good amount. And anyone who thinks that this movie doesn't have a lot of monster battles in it, and yet they like some of the older ones, I think they're kind of misremembering them with rose-tinted goggles, because the first Godzilla movie doesn't really have any action in it until the last 30 minutes. Now, granted, Godzilla pops up here and there before that, but he doesn't show up until the last 30 minutes in full form of the original movie. There's plenty of Godzilla movies where that is the case, where he's just kind of, in the background, and then he comes out at the end. So to act like this one doesn't have a lot of battles, and then to act like the old Japanese ones have a lot, I think you're kind of misremembering some of them. And while I do admit there are some Japanese ones that have way more battles than this one does, that's not always the case. And a lot of these same people who would criticize this one would not criticize the other ones because they're the OG classics. I think the CGI in this was really well done. I personally am a big fan of the older practical effects, so I definitely understand why some people might be turned off by CGI. But the CGI looks fantastic. And as much as I love the practical effects, when you look back at it, you can tell it's just a guy in a rubber suit. And while I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I enjoy those, I do think that this was the right way to go about doing this one. Do I think realistic practical effects could be made that made it look like a real Godzilla is there? Absolutely, because we have that kind of technology now, but budget and technology are two things that go hand in hand. If you don't have the budget to make the suits, make a computerized version. You can still make a decent movie. And I thought that all the monsters looked fantastic in this movie. Some people might get a little turned off by, like I said, the fact that you don't see Mothra as much. And Mothra has these weird kind of glowing wings during one scene, but I really liked the symbolism behind that. But overall, I thought this was a great movie, and I hope you'll enjoy it too if you decide to go see it. Let me know in the comments below what you thought if you've seen it, or if you're planning to see it. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red Eye, and you have a great day.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.